I'm gonna give you the power of co-hosting. You wanna share screen?
Yes, very much so. Let me quickly try. There we go. So, should work, hopefully.
Ah, yeah, for sure. Don't worry. Perfect. I see your
Yeah, wait
your
a sec. There.
animal.
All right, yes, this is better, I think. There we go.
Oh no, marvelous. Yeah, yeah.
Mm, yeah, I'll quickly pause my animal in the meantime. All right, so perfect.
Yeah, yeah. You have to teach me how to do that.
Yes, okay. I'm here and I'm here to stay. Great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's perfect. We see the screen and just come on.
Can I get started or should I wait a moment more?
No, no, you gonna start. I'm gonna be translating some thoughts about your speech by chat, so through the chat, and don't worry, we're gonna translate.
Uh, Real time. Okay, I'll
Yeah,
try
in
to
real
talk not
time. We're
too
gonna share
quickly.
the record with subtitles and
All
making
right,
easy to people to know more about your work.
that would be very nice. So I'm gonna put this slightly out of. There we go. So I'm gonna let my spider do one more walk. There we go. Nice. So so thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here again. I guess as this is the
Yeah,
second
second
time.
time for
Second
second.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here again. Um, and today I would like to tell something more about exposure therapy using augmented reality, particularly using a smartphone application and how it could be used to improve clinical practice. And as I was here previously, primarily from the perspective of EFPA, the European Federation of Psychologists Associations, this time I'm here a bit on behalf of my own work at Thomas Moore University of Applied Sciences in Belgium, Antwerp. And like for the next max half hour or so, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about AR for phobia by first highlighting what AR exactly is, which studies we have been conducting so far, and also to draw like some first conclusions and also look a bit ahead into next steps, questions that we still have, opportunities perhaps as well for collaboration that might arise. And definitely at the very end, I'm gonna jump out of my presentation and back into my regular screen. I'll happily answer any questions if there might be any as well. So, for those of you who might not yet be too familiar with AR, what is it exactly? AR stands for augmented reality, and it's a domain that's rapidly evolving. So there are currently a lot of terms being used, but generally speaking, you can call it a sort of extended reality where virtual elements are added to the physical world. Um, that might sound a bit abstract at the moment, but hopefully, when I show you some concrete examples, it should become slightly more specific, or at least so I hope. Um, Although it's by far not as substantiated to VR, it's quite similar yet also different. It's really taking place in the actual world, whereas VR takes you to a whole different world. And for some applications, that has its downsides, but as you'll probably see in a moment, for phobia in particularly, it does have some advantages to take virtual stuff into people's everyday life and environment. AR at the moment is a working term, I guess. Sometimes it's actually also the synonym to slightly suboptimal real life experiences with these kinds of technology. Most of you might know it from Pokemon Go, for example, but it's gradually actually improving and becoming more sensitive of its surroundings. And a term that will probably be more common in the near future will be mixed reality, which basically means that the clear distinction between virtual elements and real life will gradually tend to disappear and will be more difficult to distinguish as well. So that's basically what AR is. And one particular application I would like to talk to you about is, and I think it's very relevant also for an Argentinian, for a Ibero-American conference, is an Argentinian app called Phobos AR. Phobos AR is a smartphone application that was specifically developed to treat or at least be used to elicit anxiety for different animals in augmented reality. So here, this is an example of a spider which is not actually there, but by holding up, in this case, the tablet, by looking on the tablet and showing its environment, you can add virtual animals to, well, seemingly add virtual animals to real life. And it's not just spiders. There's, for example, also dogs um, who can bark. The screen cap is not really doing it justice. It's actually far more real when you're actually standing there looking around. And compared to a lot of games that use augmented reality, the whole goal of this app is to go for not too abrupt, fancy, or very explosive experiences, but really gradually controlled, like choosing in which direction an animal goes, at which speed it walks, where it walks to, and so on. So this is, for example, a rat jumping, walking, and so on. And so I kind of stumbled upon this app a couple of years ago. Um, I had a chat with the developer who was at the time in Buenos Aires. And quickly we thought that, well, although the app was basically a good proof of concept, it wasn't substantiated in any way. So although we thought that such animals might elicit anxiety, we weren't too sure. And although we thought it had therapeutic potential because he was not only a developer but also a clinical psychologist as a background, we weren't too sure that it would actually work really if you put it to the test and put it into controlled conditions. So what we basically did was a first study that only recently has been published that really checked whether virtual animals presented through augmented reality can elicit anxiety. It wasn't the first study to do so. Studies had already been conducted on the potential of AR, for example, from the group from Baños in Spain. But it was the first time that we did it that it was done using something very simple, something very common nowadays, a basic, well, to some extent, iPhone with a smartphone app that, well, is to some extent freely available. It's in the App Store now for like $2.99 or something like that. So can you use such fairly basic tools and elicit anxiety with patients and potentially also treat them? Because we didn't want to rush ahead and start right away with clinical trial stuff, the first thing we did is really test whether it indeed led to an increase in anxiety. Can you use such an app and make people who are not clinically afraid, but perhaps to some extent slightly reluctant towards using this kind of or being exposed to these kind of animals, can you elicit anxiety with them through augmented reality? That was basically what we put to the test. And we did it in two experiments. The first one was to see whether it could elicit anxiety and whether screen size, iPhone versus iPad, actually had an impact on that self-reported anxiety. And well, our hypothesis obviously was yes, that we could elicit anxiety when we put them to the test and let them go through increasingly challenging situations where they have to face an animal of which they're not necessarily highly afraid, but at the very least quite reluctant towards. And then, well, we thought the bigger the screen, the more anxious people tend to get. So that was our second hypothesis. To test it, we actually used some students at our campus, so fairly standard student sample, and we randomized them across the different conditions. And also they were not allowed to be phobic per se, but they could choose any animal that they thought, well, if I had an opportunity to avoid it to some extent, I might. That was somewhat the criterion that we aimed for. So 1 week before, they did a quick survey to test whether they actually were not phobic. And during the experiment, they were asked to self-report their anxiety at every step of the way on a typical subjective units of distress scale ranging from 1 to 10. So basically, so they chose an animal, and it was presented here. For example, through the iPad, if it was a dog, they could basically do different steps. There were three steps in this first experiment. In case of the dog, the first step was that they could project the dog on the little cross and gradually walk closer towards that dog while it remained there silently. So they had to do 3 steps and every time report how anxious they were. In the second phase, they could go back to their starting point. They could walk towards the dog, but this time the dog would be barking, as you briefly also saw in the clip earlier on. So it was barking, and every time they had to walk closer, report their anxiety. Finally, for the third phase, it was no longer them walking, but the dog walking towards them. They could still control it using the buttons on the iPad, like here down below. So they could still control to some extent the dog walking towards them, but it had to come towards them rather than them towards the dog. And the idea was that each step would be incrementally more difficult and that we should see within each of the 3 steps a steady rise in self-reported anxiety. Normally, if you do these kinds of behavioral approach tasks, you actually compare how far people tend to go. Like if you have 10 different steps of increasing intensity, you see when people decide, I'm no longer doing this. Here, as it were non-phobic participants, and it was still not real, it was only augmented reality, we were not necessarily interested in the amount of steps that they could successfully complete, but on that evolution of self-reported anxiety. So that's experiment 1, and I'll keep you in a bit of tension for now for the results by first quickly looking at experiment 2. In experiment 2, we said, well, let's take the same approach, but work a bit more standardized. Let's again take the behavioral approach task, but limit it only to spiders. So 3 different spiders with a student sample. And instead of doing 3 different ones, let's take just 6 tasks and make them increasingly difficult. And again, our hypothesis was that over time, after step after step after step, anxiety won't increase over time, and well, students would become increasingly fearful. So it looked a bit like this. Again, so first we had a table set out with different crosses, and the idea was that they would gradually let spiders come closer to them, and at changing intervals, the spiders would actually become bigger or more concrete. So as you can see, for example, here, the spider 1 on the top left, for example, is a bit more abstract and geometrically less real. That's a deliberate choice to make it less anxiety-inducing. Spider 2 is slightly more realistic. Spider 3 is a big one, and Spider 4 is like more the Black Widow kind of a type. So we kind of played around with that to create an experience that was ever increasingly terrifying, and it started with the spider being a meter away from you, and it ended up with crawling on your hand. So again, with the main idea that the further people got, the more anxiety-inducing the situation would actually be for them. So that was the setup, that was the goal. What happened? So if we actually looked at the very first one, so the 3 different behavioral approach tasks and the 3 different phases, what we tended to see was indeed that we found this gradual and steady increase within each task and also across the different tasks. There was a clear increase over time. You might be wondering, like, why are there different lines? Why is this distinction made here? One of the parameters that we were also interested in was the level of perceived realism, meaning that the extent to which people thought or felt like the animal was real. And there was actually a clear distinction that could be made between the people who thought, well, this animal doesn't look too real to me, although they did have an increase, the slope was less steep. But from the moment that people felt like they were at least slightly realistic or highly realistic according to them, the increase was far more substantial. So that kind of confirmed our initial hypotheses. To our surprise, we could not replicate or we could not find an effect of screen size, meaning that bigger isn't apparently necessarily better, at least for AR and in our study. there was no difference found between screen size and the reported effect. So this is the data for the final most anxiety-inducing situation. And we could actually not find a difference. Even more so, it kind of looked like the iPhone kind of performed even the iPad. So smaller in this case was seemingly somewhat better, although not significantly. We have some ideas why this could have happened, and I'll briefly share those with you later on. So this was a first attempt, and although it was an interesting first step, it was also a bit messy, because this data was actually constructed with not one but 6 different animals. So there were spiders, cockroaches, dogs, pigeons, snakes, and I'm missing one, but all these types of animals that you ideally would not want to find in your living room late at night, or at least unexpectedly. And so that made the results slightly more difficult to interpret. So when we basically took the next step, we only so focused on spiders. And here we clearly saw a very clear-cut similar pattern, again, with realism playing an important role, but also more importantly, if you look at the starting levels all the way at the bottom, so people actually start off with looking at the spider somewhere at the end of the table and saying, well, on a scale of like 1 to 10, this is like at max 1 to me, potentially also, or from 0 to 10, this is like 0.5. But over the course of time and throughout the different steps, we actually do manage to increase that anxiety significantly. So people, by the time that they have to let a spider walk across their hand for real, they are genuinely, well, I wouldn't say necessarily scared, but on average, they are quite substantially more afraid than they were at the beginning. So it does appear that having a smartphone at your availability and a virtual spider can elicit some actual real life fear in people. And that's the first finding that we've actually seen, that the first time that a smartphone based augmented reality using something just developed with ARKit, which is Apple's standard framework for AR development, that it can elicit these types of anxieties in a non-clinical population. And the screen size thing, our idea basically here is that tablets are slightly less convenient to use. So they're a bit more bulky. You have to keep them often in both hands. And definitely with spiders, it came a bit tricky to hold the tablet and look at the spider walking across your hand through the tablet. So that might have messed a bit with the experience. But definitely, I think it's primarily worthwhile noting that it does seem to elicit some level of anxiety. And I think that's a very important starting point, because now we know that it can terrify people to some extent. And if you can do this with a regular non-phobic population, next steps and these are basically steps that we're also definitely open to collaboration for, is, well, how do you translate this to a clinical population? And we've done some, we're in the midst of doing the preparatory work to do some studies on how to integrate this in clinical practice. So there are different ways that you could potentially use this. For example, it could be a great starting point for a therapist who maybe doesn't readily available have a full set of spiders somewhere tucked away in the cupboard. It might also be very interesting to give home with patients intermittently as a part of homework exercises, to ask them to project virtual spiders in, for example, places at home where they would expect real life spiders occurring or appearing. Although, yeah, there's still some unclarity on how you could use it, and also if you would solely rely on AR and no longer use virtual, real life spiders altogether, how it would compare to that as well. So you can integrate it with current practice, but could you perhaps separate it from current practice altogether and solely rely on virtual spiders as well, for example, for phobia or virtual dogs? So these are some of the questions that we're really looking forward to exploring. Again, primarily with easily accessible low-level stuff like an iPhone and an iPhone app. although there's like I think it's the Apple event today, they tend to say this stuff like one more thing. We also have one more thing, and that's the question that relates to the immersive medium. So most AR up to date is experienced through a smartphone or through a tablet, but we do see a gradual increase of I think hardware that promises a more immersive experience. We are actually still wondering whether creating a more immersive medium or making use of a more immersive medium might make it even or create an even stronger impact in terms of the anxiety that people tend to experience. That's why we now started to explore the potential of the HoloLens 2 actually. And we would have started data collection, I think, next week, but Corona and Belgium is currently well into its second wave. That kind of interfered with our plans. But we did already develop, we had somebody develop a very basic HoloLens application for us now, which looks a bit like this. So it's the same spider. It's one of the biggies, and you can basically walk around just wearing the headset, looking at it, glancing at it from every direction. And although it's not in the screen cap here, we can also make it walk around slowly towards you at different intervals, making it stop. So the idea is now to replicate what we've done so far with a smartphone and to compare it to this, well, much more high level medium. But obviously, I think the idea is also that in time, the HoloLens, although now still a bit exotic, I guess, and out of the average consumer's price range, that this will become increasingly mainstream and might offer some look at the not too distant future and how AR could start playing a role in our everyday lives on the one hand, but in clinical practice on the other hand. So that's a bit what's ahead for us. So I briefly skipped through the results of the first two experiments and what we've done so far, but you can always take a look at the paper, which you find the reference to my left right here. I'm always happy to answer any questions right now, but be sure to, or don't hesitate to reach out to me like through Twitter or through my email. So I'm still very happy with the ongoing collaboration with Fernando Tarnogo, who is the Argentinian developer, who does this, by the way, from a non-profit point of view. And you can find more about him and his work on tarnogo.com as well. So given that webinars are not necessarily too easy to keep people interested and motivated, I tended to keep it quite brief, so I hope you've managed to stay with me along the way. And if there might be any questions, I'll happily answer them right now. So thanks for your attention.
Oh, thanks, Tom. No, very interesting, very innovative, your kind of presentation. And yeah, we have two questions from Argentina.
All right.
But one of the question can be, it depends. It's complicated because she's asking, she's more area, and she want to know if do you have statistics on how many phobic people are in total population, maybe the potential market for this kind of apps.
Like for the potential population for single phobia, you mean? Or
Yeah. Yeah. For phobia in general, not specific with animals or that. We are talking about the problem, not depending of the one animal or the other one. If not, we are talking about I got big phobia, and this kind of augmented reality or the HoloLens could be useful for me, no? And we have to think something different. How many professionals we have to teach in the use of these kinds of resources?
Mm-hmm. I think you cannot. So I think there's two parts to the of the answer to that question. The first part is that it's actually difficult to overestimate the amount of people who suffer from a specific phobia. So there's a lot of them, but it's also important to not overemphasize the potential of treating those specific phobias. Like People can be afraid, for example, of small spaces or fear of flying or specific animals, and you can treat them to no longer be afraid of those animals, but the underlying issues might be far broader than that, and you could like help them let go of their anxiety for dogs, and next week it might transfer
Yeah,
to
for sure.
cats, so to say. But still, I think on average, the anxiety disorders and specific phobias, I don't know it by heart, but it's somewhere around the 10 to 15% of the general population at least has some level, some sort of specific anxiety. Um, and although not all of them actually need help or want help, I think there's a substantial market, so to say. So there's a substantial amount of people that could benefit from this. Um, and in terms of, do psychologists need to be trained to use this kind of technology? I would actually be inclined to say that um, ideally, every psychologist to some extent learns how to work with this type of technology. And although that might seem challenging, this is by far the easiest piece of tech I've encountered in recent years myself. It's basically installing an app, pointing, clicking, and your virtual animal appears. So compared to online self-help, guided self-help interventions, wearables, even VR stuff, this is far more easy to implement in routine care compared to a lot of other technological solutions. So the threshold to actually start using this type of technology, especially as it might become more more accustomed and more available over time, should be pretty low as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, absolutely. Last year we have some colleagues from Spain working on virtual reality, and the group this kind of solutions. And this year we're talking with them again, and they say, no, we have improving our solution, our programs, and some of them are using their own trademark.
Mm-hmm.
It's expensive. Other ones say, no, I prefer to give to people, to professionals, low cost solutions, and invest more money in research and different programs. No, finally that's going to benefit more people. But the feeling was the same. No, we need to train professionals in the use of this kind of technology, because first question, what happens also in Argentina was the last year. Someone told us, yeah, I'm psychologist in Cordoba province, in the center of the country. And now my neighbor, he's not psychology, he's not professional. Now he's selling glasses for virtual reality. And people love that, no? People into spending money. But when I ask him, okay, man, what's happened with you? You don't have any kind of knowledge about how to use that, no? You are selling people a solution. If people looking in YouTube and Google, they will say, "Oh, that's fine. It's going to work with me." Oh, or maybe not, because you are selling the tool, not the knowledge
Yeah.
behind the tool.
And I think that's also why we really took the very first step here with the study we've conducted so far, and to test really the most basic of basic assumptions, which is, can it elicit anxiety altogether, before actually exposing patients to such a tool as well. And even then we'll do it very cautiously, because it does remain to some extent new technology, and although it's perhaps only a new medium, you should still be fairly cautious to actually start using that in practice. So I think it holds promise, but there's still some work to be done from a research point of view as well. And we hope to do so in the next few months and years, I guess.
No, for sure. Well, one of the main points of this conference, of our work in network with Spanish-speaking countries, rely on that, no? In the need to share and to collaborate in research. Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Spain, because we need to invest more in research. And in our countries, usually there is less money investing in research. So most of the people have to choose, no? Okay, I
Yeah.
got my research group, I have to choose. Where is the money? No, where is the need? No, what can benefit more population? If not, if I want to survive, I have to publish, of course. And more of that, I need to choose projects with benefit from governments or another kind. No, but in this kind of conversation, dialogues, I think that's very important. First of all, try to collaborate with your group and from your research to translate to other countries and within the Spanish framework, and collaborate if you are gonna develop some kind of trainings or that to offer translated to Spanish people, no? Because I know that's a very big problem in these moments, even with the COVID, no? Now in these moments, another question we have in the chat is if this kind of solutions of technologies or programs are self-assisted app or is through expert use. What happens with the COVID, with the lockdown, most of the resources from real virtuality and that were self-assisted. And that's a problem because you are you are not trained, you don't know the effects, you are not an expert, you don't have research about that, but you say, okay, I have to maintain the service. No, I think that's a problem, no?
I definitely think so. And so just to clarify, the app at the moment is in the App Store, but it's not for free. And the main reason it's not for free is that people don't necessarily or are not too eager to pay for apps. And paying for an app already requires some motivation, and the idea is to deter people from installing such an application just to have some fun and to play around with it, or to experiment on themselves to some extent as well. So I think indeed it's not necessarily, or it shouldn't be used at the moment to treat oneself. Not only because we don't necessarily know effects, but also because it probably won't work. So the application itself here is very straightforward. You just take animals and you can make them do stuff and appear in your vicinity. But even the more elaborate applications using VR, for example, there's an iPhone and Android app called Zerophobia.app. I don't know if people have heard from it. You can, I think it costs like €14.99 or something like that. You can install it in the App Store, and it's actually proven effective self-help in an RCT context. So there's a study on it. It shows that people can indeed use it themselves to treat oneself. But my worry here, and also what I see from the uptake in practice, is that people don't successfully manage to get themselves sufficiently engaged with a self-help application to treat themselves in VR, but also in the more conventional therapies. So the idea that we can create effective programs, put them online, or put tools online, and just hope that people will use them themselves, use them wisely, and make oneself better. That's I think this just won't happen. That would be ideal given the urgent need for care and for people finding help, but I don't think that will quickly or in the near future manage to find a solution for the fact that the overall majority of people will always require a professional to guide them through the process and to help them make the most of the tools that are available. And it's basically the same for the Phobos AR app. It will only work and only be useful at the moment if it's used by a skilled clinician. And well, actually pending also the research that we're still doing to explore its clinical potential as well. So it's still very premature, and it might be good to do this talk again next year when we have more findings on the clinical efficacy and effectiveness, as there's still a lot of work to be done in that domain.
No,